Hey, everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan. Coming up on this week's episode, Microsoft confirms Workaround for those unable to install Windows updates on Windows 11 24H2. Also, I'll feature a roundup of some Patch Tuesday news. And something called Hushed Hybrid is apparently on the rise, and we'll talk about it. For this and more, keep listening to this episode of the podcast, which, of course, as always, is brought to you by my sponsors. And that includes Numescent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops. And of course, also brought to you by Master Packager, who make an application packaging software that helps you build packages that end users love, enterprises want, and the Windows OS needs. If you enjoy the show each week, you have these awesome sponsors to thank. And now for some news. Well, it's that time of the month again, Patch Tuesday. And this month, 55 vulnerabilities, including 4 zero-day vulnerabilities, have been patched with the Windows updates. And 2 of those zero-day vulnerabilities have been actively exploited in attacks. For a total roundup of the vulnerabilities patched this month, it includes 19 elevation of privilege vulnerabilities, 2 secure feature bypass vulnerabilities, 22 remote code execution vulnerabilities, 1 information disclosure vulnerability, 9 denial of service vulnerabilities, and 3 spoofing vulnerabilities. So I would say kind of overall 55 vulnerabilities patched this month is a little on the light side, but you definitely don't want to sleep on this because there are 2 actively exploited vulnerabilities already in attack. And that includes the Windows Storage Elevation of Privilege vulnerability that's tracked as CVE-2025-21391. And an attacker is able to delete targeted files on a system by leveraging this vulnerability. The vulnerability itself does not allow disclosure of any confidential information, but could allow an attacker to delete data that could include data that results in a service becoming unavailable. No information has been released about how this flaw has been exploited in attacks. Another one was CVE-2025-21418, and this is a Windows Ancillary Function Driver for WinSock Elevation of Privilege vulnerability. And this vulnerability allows threat actors to gain system privileges in Windows. So the old classic elevation of privilege vulnerability. There's very little information shared on this one, and it's unknown how it was exploited, but it appears to have been one of the 2 that was exploited. Other zero-day vulnerabilities that have not been exploited, at least according to the report from bleepingcomputer.com at the time of recording this episode, is CVE-2025-21194. And this one is a Microsoft Surface security feature bypass vulnerability. So a little more niche, I guess. And Microsoft has said that this flaw is a hypervisor vulnerability that allows attacks to bypass UEFI and compromise the secure kernel. Not a good one either. CVE-2025-21377 is the final zero-day vulnerability, and this is an NTLM hash disclosure spoofing vulnerability. And Microsoft has fixed this disclosed bug that exposes a user's NTLM hashes, allowing a remote attacker to potentially log in as a user. As always, other vendors in the space have also released their own updates in alignment with Patch Tuesday, including the likes of Cisco, Apple, and more. So be sure to patch early, patch often, and as always, I expect some of the fallout, some of the issues caused by these Windows updates to reach the news for next week's episode. As part of this month's Windows updates, Microsoft has also released KB 5051974, which is a cumulative update for Windows 10 22H2 and Windows 10 21H2. And just a heads up, these Windows updates automatically install the new Outlook for Windows app on those respective Windows 10 versions. And if you're an administrator and you want to manage this update, there's a how-to article shared by bleepingcomputer.com. And yeah, definitely heads up because you don't want to get flooded with support calls unexpectedly that, hey, my Outlook has changed. So you need to know about this one. An optional update has reportedly fixed a long-standing issue in Windows 11 24H2 that has prevented non-admin users from changing their time zone in date and time settings. So, I mean, not the worst issue in the world, but certainly one that would be annoying to non-admin users. So, glad to see that this is at least being addressed. although it being an optional update means that some organizations, probably aren't going to be very active in managing and making sure this one gets out. An exploit has been published for CVE-2024-53704, a flaw which allows a remote attacker to hijack active SSL VPN sessions without authentication, granting them unauthorized access to a victim's network. The issue impacts SonicWall's Sonic OS version 7.1.x up to 7.1.1-7058, 7.1.2-7019, and version 8.0.0-8035. These versions run in multiple models of Generation 6 and Generation 7 firewalls, as well as Soho series devices. Fixes were made available in Sonic OS version 8.0.0.8037 and later, and also in 7.0.1-5165 and higher, and 7.1.3.7015 and higher, and also 6.5.5.1-6N and higher. Researchers who discovered the exploit held off on publishing the exploit for a while to allow customers enough time to take on the already available fixes. As of February 7th, apparently, 4,500 internet-exposed SonicWall SSL VPN servers without the security update was found online. With the working proof-of-concept exploit now publicly available, the clock is certainly ticking for everyone to get those devices patched and secured. I believe I covered it on a podcast, I think it was 2 years ago now, so the metric is probably dated. But the majority of vulnerabilities that have a publicly disclosed exploit are leveraged in attacks by cyber gangs in less than 7 days. 2 vulnerabilities patched this month by Cisco are for the Cisco ICE and ICE Passive Identity Connector appliances, and these are CVE-2025-20124 and 20125, and they can be exploited by authenticated remote attackers with read-only admin privileges to execute arbitrary commands as root and bypass authorization on unpatched devices. And this one gets a hefty 9.9 out of 10 on the severity scale, which I guess is not surprising because read-only admin privileges can be used to execute the commands, and you can achieve root. There are also some other high-severity vulnerabilities disclosed by Cisco that can result in denial-of-service attacks, and apparently those have not yet been patched. But there is some guidance on how to secure against denial-of-service attacks using these vulnerabilities, and Cisco confirmed no denial-of-service attacks are currently occurring with the use of these vulnerabilities for the attacks. Microsoft has shared a workaround for users affected by a known issue that blocks Windows security updates from deploying on some Windows 11 24H2 systems that were installed using USB or CD. Microsoft confirmed the workaround that was already known in the community, which is if a device becomes unable to receive further updates as a result of the issue, it could be remediated by reinstalling Windows 11 versions 24H2 using media which instead includes the December 2024 monthly security update or later. Now, people in the community had already noticed that it was just with the earlier patch levels. I believe it was October and November. I don't have it in front of me, but I think if you installed via USB or CD and the patch level was October and November, security updates may not actually work in future. But if you install with December's patch level, so basically the later version of Windows 11 24H2 is your base, it seems to not have the same issue. So not a great workaround, but essentially re-image with a newer version. Google has reportedly fixed a couple of flaws that could be chained together to unmask YouTube's users' email addresses. Researchers found with the known vulnerabilities, they simply click on the 3-dot menu in a chat and it triggers a background request to YouTube's API, allowing them to access the ID without having to block them. By modifying the API call, the researchers retrieved the Gaia ID, I think it's called, of any YouTube channel, including those attempting to remain anonymous. The researchers disclosed the flaw to Google on September 24th of last year, and it was ultimately fixed only last week on February 9th. Google initially responded that the vulnerability was a duplicate of a previously tracked bug and only awarded the researchers a $3,133 bounty. However, after they demonstrated the ability to chain it with another component, they increased the bounty to $10,633. An outage of Cloudflare occurred late last week when an employee apparently responded to an abuse report about a phishing URL in Cloudflare's R2 platform. However, instead of just blocking the specific endpoint, the employee mistakenly turned off the entire R2 gateway service. Ooh. Cloudflare said in a statement, quote, "This was a failure of multiple system-level controls, first and foremost, and operator training," end quote. They did basically say that it was one person's fault, but at least they also owned up and said, this is also multiple system level controls because, maybe one person should not be able to make this kind of mistake and take down an entire service. Regardless, I feel really bad for the person who clicked the button. A brute force attack campaign has been going on for over a month, but reportedly recently escalated into a larger scale brute force password spray attack using almost 2.8 million IP addresses. In the attacks, it's password spray, so as it suggests, the attackers are trying to guess the credentials for a wide range of networking devices, including those from Palo Alto, Avanti, and SonicWall. 1.1 million of the devices are from Brazil, followed by Turkey, Russia, Argentina, Morocco, and Mexico. But there's generally a very large number of countries of origin participating in the activity. Everyone is advised to protect edge devices from brute force attacks by changing their default admin password to a strong and unique one, enforcing multi-factor authentication, using an allow list of trusted IPs, and disabling web admin interfaces if they're not required. Ultimately, you should also apply the latest firmware and security updates for your particular devices. Despite reports of ransomware attacks in which victims paid large ransoms last year, such as Change Healthcare, ransomware payments actually fell overall in 2024, according to a report by Ars Technica. And in the second half of last year, they dropped more precipitously than in any 6-month period on record. Cryptocurrency tracing firm Chainalysis released a portion of its annual crime report focused on tracking the ransomware industry, which found that ransomware victims' extortion payments totaled $814 million in 2024, which is actually a 35% drop compared to the record of $1.25 billion that hackers extracted from ransomware victims the previous year. Hackers reportedly collected just $321 million from July through December, compared to $492 million in the previous half year. So hopefully that's a good sign, although $814 million is still quite a lot of money and quite the incentive. RTE News have reported that there are apparently unofficial agreements involving local managers signing off on individuals' work arrangements not following official company policy, and these unofficial agreements being made between employees and bosses that go against, the return to office policies is being called hushed hybrid. These deals reportedly often are done to retain staff in the current tight labor market where the competition for talent in certain sectors remains fierce. Hushed hybrid arrangements are reportedly on the rise as well, with research firm Robert Walters showing that more than 40% of Irish managers have said they would implement hushed hybrid to allow their teams flexibility despite increasing calls from their bosses for staff to return to the office. OpenAI has reportedly effectively canceled the release of their O3 model in favor of a simplified product offering, according to CEO Sam Altman. It appears they will instead move their focus to releasing GPT-5. Of course, the O3 mini model is already available, so this is just about the standalone O3 model itself. Reportedly, those with a Plus subscription will be able to run the new GPT-5 when it comes out with a higher level of intelligence compared to those without the subscription. The model will reportedly incorporate voice, canvas, search, deep search, and more. It can be a little bit confusing with these various different models they've released, including these kind of reasoning models and non-reasoning models. The mini models are designed to be reasoning models that are tailored to specific tasks, such as mathematics and coding. Essentially, they're more efficient models for doing those specific tasks like coding, for example. It's not going to have to query as broadly, and it's more contextually aware of what those tasks are and how to best handle those queries. Whereas a model like GPT-4 would be considered a non-reasoning model. It's much more broad in terms of its scope and its search. And GPT-5 looks to be the upcoming non-reasoning model that will be more widely used for various different use cases. TechCrunch.com has reported that a company called Workday is launching a new way for enterprises to keep track of all of their AI agents in one place. Reportedly, the system gives companies visibility into what all of their agents are supposed to be doing, which tasks they are actually completing, and who at the company has access to which agents. The software tracks the impact of each AI agent and projected costs. Companies can also use the platform to turn agents on and off entirely, or turn certain skills or tasks on or off. Workday also announced a fleet of its own new AI agents that are focused on areas including payroll, contracts, and financial auditing, among others. So yeah, I was kind of thinking about this myself previously. If you've got all these kind of agentic AI running around the place, you really need a way to have that 10,000 foot view to keep track on them. So this sounds like a smart move by this company, Workday. But now this episode's scripts, tricks, and tips. First up, the awesome Tim Mangan shared his MSIX report card for 2025. If you haven't seen any of the previous report cards, Tim has essentially been keeping track of the progress of MSIX in terms of application compatibility. It looks like this year, once again, he's expanded his sample of applications. I believe it's 115 applications he's using to measure the compatibility with MSIX. I can't remember if it applies to this version, but in previous versions of the MSIX report card, he was basically using a set of applications that were likely to work in AppV as the basis for testing against MSIX, just to see how the compatibility rate compares. So yeah, definitely check out the report card to see the progress of MSIX and also the progress of Tim's tooling in helping to combat and tackle some of those application challenges when getting to MSIX. And apologies, because once again, I am promoting some of my own stuff, and I did give a warning, I think about 2 or 3 weeks ago, that I'd be doing this. But first off, I posted a new YouTube video where I discuss Azure Virtual Desktop versus Windows 365 and picking which one is right for you. So basically just going through each offering and maybe some of the determining factors for you. But also, Jim Moyle posted some videos highlighting the integrations for Outage in Microsoft Azure Virtual Desktop. So if you're doing application management in AVD and you want to see some of the expanded options, not just AppV and MSIX, check out the video that I've linked with this episode, which is episode 273, and you'll find that at 5bytespodcast.com. And finally, speaking of Jim Moyle, I'm actually co-hosting a webinar with Jim Moyle on February 18th, which is Tuesday, February 18th, and that will be at 4 p.m. GMT, which I believe is 5 p.m. Central European Time, 8 a.m. Pacific, or 11 a.m. Eastern. So if you'd like to attend this webinar, it's going to be on, again, those Outage integrations, some of the enhancements around application management in AVD, and also I'll introduce you to Nemescent Cloud Pager. And I'll share a link to register with this episode, and we'd love to have you as an attendee. And if you can't make it at that time on the 18th, you can register anyways to get a copy of the recording. Well, that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening.